We obviously didn't complete chapter 8 yesterday. Let's see what happens. So we are in the second part of chapter 8. Vashisht is out in the night strolling around the Gurukul, and today in the morning he talked about Maharishi Shukracharya, and he was worried that his students are going to have some inner turmoil and discussions. He found Shatrughan and Lakshman sound asleep, so he started looking for Bharat and Ram. They were missing in their quarters. After walking a little, he heard sounds, soft conversations of two people. He soon saw a silhouette of Bharat talking to some girl. Now it looks like Bharat and Radhika were having a breakup moment. And Radhika is telling him that she cannot go against her family to marry him, and Bharat is asking why. Vashish decided to just walk away because he did not want to be an intruder to that sensitive moment. So he started looking for Ram. In that rocky mountain-cut area around the Gurukul, there were a few temples, including the temple of Lord Indra. Vashisht went towards those temples, and Indra's temple was in the middle, symbolizing the most powerful one. He was the one who defeated the Asuras in the battle. When he went close to the idol of Indra, he heard soft sounds, so he instinctively moved towards it. The space behind that idol was large enough to accommodate 4 to 5 people. Behind it, he found Ram looking into some huge inscriptions. He was sitting on his knees, and he could sense the presence of Vashisht. So Ram just stood up and said, "Guruji." So Vashisht just goes to Ram and pats on his shoulder and makes him sit and asks, "Can you read that inscription?" Now it was age-old Sanskrit, the kind of Sanskrit people don't read anymore. So Ram says, "I have never seen a script like it." Vashisht then tells him that this is a banned script in India because it was used by the Asuras. Now Ram remembered what Vashisht has taught in the morning. So he asks, "You mentioned that there was this huge masculine empire before Lord Bharat. You were talking about the Asuras, isn't it?" Vashisht agrees to what he says. And then Ram asks him, "What does this inscription say, Guruji?" So all Vashisht says to him is that, how can the universe or how can anything speak the name of Shukracharya? The universe is so small and Shukracharya is so big. Legend says that this was the ashram he taught in, and this was the seat he took. There are few people who still believe that he was the greatest who walked on this earth. Not much is provided about his childhood, only that he was born in a slave family in Egypt. Shukracharya was then raised by an Asura princess, who raised him in India as her own. Shukracharya was brilliant, charismatic, and he could turn marginalized Indian royals into greatest conquering forces during that time. So Ram asks Vashisht, "Marginalized Indian royals, but weren't the Asuras foreigners?" So Vashisht says, "Nonsense. That particular myth has been spread by the people who wanted to demean the Asuras. Asuras are actually related to the Devas. Asuras and Devas come from the same ascendant, Manuskul. Only the Asuras were the poorer, weaker, forgotten cousins of the family. Only when Shukracharya came, he molded these weak, unorganized Asuras to be hardworking, disciplined, and a unified group." So then Ram asks, "But that does not explain how the Asuras became the ruling class. They became so dominant in India. How did they become so powerful? So Vashisht says that those who hate the group of Asuras, they will tell you that they were barbaric warriors, and that is what helped them succeed. So Ram says, you obviously do not agree with this opinion, do you? Vashisht then continues that Devas weren't weak either. That was the age of the Kshatriyas. So even if Asuras were strong, so were the Devas, if not better. The Asuras succeeded because they had a common purpose. Devas, on the other hand, had multiple purposes to fulfill. Then Ram asks that if they were unified, if they had a common purpose, why did their time decline? How could the Devas defeat them? Vashisht says that they declined because of a very simple reason that is still applicable. A great reason that has been a cause of your success cannot go on for a prolonged time and can even become the main reason behind decline. Shukracharya united the Asuras with the idea or the concept of Ekam, or the one God. All who worshipped that one God were equal to his eyes. So Ram says that is not something new. Even the Rig Veda has mentioned Ekam. Today we call that very thing Paramatma. Even the people who believe in a feminine way of life like the Devas also believed in Ekam. So Vashisht says there is a nuisance you are missing, Sudas. Rig Veda clearly states that while there is Ekam, or one God, that one God can come to you in any form to help us grow in spirituality so that we can finally understand his original and final form. But Shukracharya taught something different. He taught that all the other forms of Ekam were false. They were Maya, or illusion. Only the Ekam, the only one Ekam, was true, and that is only to be followed. And this was a very radical thought during that time. This concept rose a small conflict, the conflict of spirituality. A man who was not at all spiritual and a man who was very spiritual was considered to be the same because they believed in one God, Ekam. So Ram says that this would make all human beings equal. So Vashisht says that yes, this idea worked for a really long time because it unified the Asuras. And not only that, the depressed and oppressed people among the Devas also began to join the group of Asuras. But you must understand that every idea has some positive points and some negative points. The Asuras who believed in the Ekam were considered to be equal. So what do you think happened to those Asuras who did not believe in the concept of Ekam? And this overall concept of one God means not accepting diversity, which can lead to intolerance. So Ram says, yes, this has been mentioned in the Upanishad. I remember the hymn that says, giving a sharp sword to a child is not an act of generosity, but irresponsibility. Is that what happened to the Asuras? So Vashisht then says, yes, Shukracharya's students were chosen by Shukracharya himself. These students could take up radical studies immediately, so the concept of Ekam was not a problem for them. But this Asura tribe, it grew. The number of people started growing. The more the people, the diverse is their thought process. What happened is, those who were capable of radical thinking, they considered their god, Ekam, to be the true and all other gods to be false. This entire idea of believing and non-believing gave rise to hatred. Oh, that person doesn't believe in Ekam, I hate him, let's kill him. That is what happened among the Asuras. Ram was flabbergasted. What? That's preposterous. Doesn't the hymn itself says that Ekam exists in one and all of us? So doesn't the idea of hating means you're hating the Ekam? So Vashisht says, yes, it is given there. But the Asuras, they thought that they were right. So as the number of Asuras grew and the number of believers grew, they became violent, They started destroying temples, people, shrines, every other thing that did not worship the Ekam. So Ram just shook his head and said, they must have turned everybody against them. So this violent condition was taken full advantage of by the Devas. Devas, they didn't have any problem. They were divided among themselves. They didn't have a concept to believe in. So they didn't even come forward to approach with a particular concept of theirs. And those who were non-Asuras, they were disgusted with the Asura way of living. That violence, that concept, that forced concept of Ekam. So what they did, they started joining the group of Devas. So Ram finally understood after this story that this is why Shukracharya was so hated. This is why Asuras lost. And this masculine way of life, it's pretty rigid. They have rules. And if you don't go by those rules, there is intolerance. And intolerance can be harmful. A feminine way of life wouldn't be that way. Vashisht then again clears him out that yes, this rigid intolerance among the masculine way of life is a huge problem. But feminine way of life has a problem as well. They're free. They have their own ideologies. Each particular feminine believer has their own ideology. It is impossible to bring them together for a common cause. It would be a miracle to bring them all together to fight for a single cause, because they are already so divided among themselves. So Ram, after hearing all this story, concluded, India is declining because of its feminine way of life, so the masculine way of life needs to be revived, only it must be taken care of that those Asura days are not repeated. A few changes and alterations must be made. Questioning and curiosity should be encouraged. You are asking me to follow this rule. Why should I follow this rule? Common people should have the right to question. We need a more tailored way of living. So Vashisht asks Ram that why not the feminine way of living? So Ram says that the feminine way of life has this entire concept of running away from responsibilities. If you ask a leader, what should I do? All they will say is, it's your choice. And this is a problem because when things go wrong, there will be nobody to lead. But in a masculine way of life, there is a leader who will come up with a responsible choice. There is a clear direction and a purpose of how society should move. Without a proper decision making, there will be only discussions, analysis and paralysis, nothing finalized. Vashisht smiled and said that you are oversimplifying things. But yes, if you are looking for quick improvement, masculine way of life works. Feminine way of life needs time. But when it is completely set, it's more durable. Ram says no, masculine way of life can be stable if we learn from the mistakes made in the past. So Vashisht asks, would you be able to lead such a path? Ram says, I certainly will try. It's my duty to my motherland. Vashisht smiles and says, okay, you're welcome to try out the masculine way of life, only please don't name it Asuras. Such a name will only be seen with huge negativity. So Ram asks him, then what name do you suggest? Vashisht continues, names don't matter. What matters is the philosophy underlying it. Back in those days, the Asuras led a masculine way of life, and the Devas led a feminine way of life. Both Suryavanshis and Chandravanshis are descendants of the feminine way of life. But the concept you are carrying within yourself, Sudas, you could call Suryavanshis the masculine way of life, and Chandravanshis the feminine way of life. However, as I said, names don't matter. So Ram just kept looking at these inscriptions about Shukracharya and he became contemplative. He was thinking of those people who still followed him. And yet again, they were not allowed to even speak his name. So Vashisht just patted him on the shoulder and said, I will tell you more about Shukracharya, his life and his philosophies. He was a genius. You can learn from his teachings and begin an empire. But always remember, While you can learn from the successes of a great person, you must also learn from their mistakes, the places they went wrong. So Ram just said, yes, Guruji. And that was the end of chapter 8. Keep coming back.